My name is Sarah. I was 28 when my dad invited me to co-present our family's business legacy, and then left my name off the stage introductions like I didn't exist. It was the annual Westfield Regional Franchise Conference, a 3-day networking summit for our partner companies, held in a beige-carpeted convention wing of the Lakeside Plaza Hotel. I'd flown in from Austin the night before, landing after midnight. Spent the morning steaming my blazer and revising my slides while sipping weak hotel room coffee. I hadn't seen my dad in nearly a year, but he'd called last week, personally. "Your name's going to be on the program, sweetheart. I want people to hear your voice this time. You've earned that." And for some reason, despite everything, I believed him. When I arrived, Mum greeted me in the lobby with a quick side hug and an iced tea already half melted. "You look tired, honey. You didn't have to do your makeup for this crowd." I smiled like it didn't sting. Like I wasn't still trying to look like a professional in a family that only called when they needed photos or PDFs. I took a seat near the front of the event hall as the opening session began. About 200 people, clients, longtime family contacts. Even the mayor of our hometown was there. The screen above the stage flickered to life. Heritage, growth, generational vision. That last part. That was supposed to be mine. Dad walked on stage to applause. He looked tan, confident, comfortable. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "This year's conference is special. We're talking legacy and family." I sat up straighter. My daughter Heather is running point on legal. My nephew Caleb's taking a leadership role in operations. He turned slightly to gesture toward Caleb, seated in the first row in a too-big blazer barely out of community college. The room clapped politely. Then came the slide. Leadership succession. My name wasn't there. Not even as strategy advisor. Not even in fine print. I blinked. No, they must have skipped it by mistake. Maybe he had a separate slide for me, maybe he... And now I'll turn it over to Caleb, who'll walk you through the vision for our next generation. The mic passed, and it was over. I sat frozen, legs crossed, hands locked around my tablet that still had the keynote I'd prepared open on screen. Mom glanced sideways at me, her smile tightly fixed. Nothing. Afterward, while people mingled over coffee and branded pens at the sponsor tables, a woman I didn't recognize approached. "Hi, Sarah, right? I thought you were going to speak. I was looking forward to hearing from you." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Only a breath. She smiled, awkward, and moved on. I stood there for a long time in the corner near the pitcher of lemon water, trying to figure out what hurt worse. That my parents had erased me, or that they'd invited me just far enough in to watch it happen. And I hadn't even reached the worst part. Because what my dad said at lunch, into the microphone with a laugh, would be the thing I'd never forget. I don't remember what I ordered for lunch. I just remember the shape of the chair, those awful plastic banquet ones with the thin metal legs that dig into your thighs, and the way Dad's voice curved upward when he made the joke. "So Caleb's got the vision," he said, lifting his water glass. "And Sarah, well, she brought the laser pointer." Laughter. Not from everyone. Just enough. A ripple of chuckles, mostly from the board members. A few clients from back in the day. My mother did her little tight-lipped smirk and sipped her rosé like it was sparkling grace. And Caleb, he laughed too hard, like a high schooler told to laugh at the principal's joke. I didn't move. My whole face went warm in that ugly way you can't hide, the kind that makes your ears throb and your chest hum like static. I forced a smile, nod, look at the bread roll. Safe, ordinary, neutral. No one even noticed I hadn't spoken. No one asked why my slides were never shown. No one looked at me like I was supposed to be anything but background. "I think it's so sweet," a woman to my left whispered loudly to her table mate, "that she's here to support the family. Not everyone needs the spotlight." I excused myself, stood, walked calmly, so calmly, through the hallway lined with framed franchise timelines and company milestones. 1984, 1991, 2003. All photos of my dad shaking hands with men in suits. Caleb's dad had one. Even Heather, with her MBA certificate day photo. Mine was nowhere. I made it outside, past the patio, down the stairs to the back parking lot, behind the loading ramp. That's when my knees buckled. Not dramatically, just enough that I had to lean on the railing, just enough to remember that I was human, not a PowerPoint accessory. I gripped the edge of the trash enclosure and breathed like I was 30 feet underwater. People passed above on the second-floor walkway. I heard a woman laugh. A man mentioned lunch options. Someone was calling for iced coffee refills. The world was moving. I wasn't. I'd left a job interview last week for this. A second-round callback for a strategic director role at a startup that actually wanted me for my ideas. I had worn this same blazer. I'd spoken about cross-market trends, segmentation frameworks, and operations agility. The recruiter had taken notes. But here, I was the girl who brought the laser pointer. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't look. Instead, I sat down on the curb behind the hotel kitchen entrance, listened to the distant whir of dishwashers and someone yelling about missing forks. And I just stayed. I don't know how long. Eventually, I heard heels, quick, urgent, then a voice I hadn't expected. "Sarah, what are you doing out here?" It was Heather, polished, posed, smelling like hotel soap and lavender. I looked up. I needed air. She crouched beside me, smoothed her pencil skirt like she was about to host a seminar on emotional regulation. Then she said, "You know he didn't mean it like that." I stared at her. "You know what he's like," she added, eyes darting. "Old school. He jokes to lighten the mood." I almost laughed. "That wasn't light," she sighed. "Look, just come back. We're doing the family photo. It'll mean a lot to Mum." I stood up. Not for the photo, not for Mum, just because sitting felt like giving up. We walked back in silence. Her heels clicking, my flats scraping, and when we reached the doors, I saw Caleb inside, laughing, holding court. Dad had his hand on his shoulder, like he belonged to something I'd never been allowed to touch. The photo turned out exactly like I expected. Dad in the center, hand still on Caleb's shoulder. Mum slightly behind him, angled just so. Heather to the left, arms crossed like a power pose. I was on the far end, almost cropped. When the hotel's event photographer glanced down at the preview screen, I caught a glimpse of myself. The corner of my blazer. Half a smile. That's all. The banquet resumed. Small talk over lemon tarts. Coffee orders I wasn't asked to join. At our table, Dad was already deep in a conversation with a regional investor about expanding the warehouse network in Arizona. Caleb chimed in, clumsy but eager. Someone laughed. Someone nodded. I felt invisible in my own family's orbit. That's when she appeared. Karen, our longtime event coordinator. Short, sharp, always in kitten heels. She'd worked these conferences since I was in high school. I knew her tone, her walk, her stress-colored lipsticks. She approached me near the registration table, where I'd gone to pretend to check my schedule, though I hadn't been given one. "I was wondering where you ended up," she said in a lowered voice. "Here." She handed me a heavy cream-colored folder, embossed, gold-trimmed. "Full staff version," she added. "I printed a few backups in case of misplacements. Yours wasn't in the press kits either, so thought you'd want a look." Something in her voice hinted, but she didn't say more. Just gave me the folder and walked off with her tablet tucked tight to her chest. I opened it slowly. Session 1. Foundations of Growth. Lead, Richard Kavanaugh. Session 2. Legal Reinforcements in Franchise Law. Lead, Heather Kavanaugh. Session 3. Legacy Operations and Succession. Lead, Caleb Mason. Session 4. Future Leadership Panel. Moderator, Caleb Mason. My name wasn't there, anywhere, but that wasn't the part that punched me. It was the notes section at the back, where I spotted it. An older version of the schedule, partially visible behind a stapled update. It was upside down, faint, but not faint enough. Session 3. Strategic Scaling in Multi-Market Environments. Led, Sarah Kavanaugh. Confirmed. I stared at it like it was a photograph of a crime, not forgotten. Removed. I flipped the pages back and forth, heart thudding behind my sternum like a warning drum. Someone had printed this first. My session had been real. I hadn't imagined it. They had included me. And then they hadn't. My hand trembled slightly as I closed the folder. I didn't know if it was rage or nausea or both, but something electric moved through me. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt awake. I scanned the room. Dad was still laughing with that same investor. Caleb was showing someone a slideshow on his phone. Mum was adjusting her hair in the mirrored column near the wine bar. They looked relaxed, unbothered, like this erasure hadn't even cost them a second thought. I walked out again. Not as far this time, just to the main hallway, past the brochure table and the oversized banner that read, "Building a Legacy That Lasts." It hit differently now, not as a slogan, as a lie. Then someone touched my arm. It was Nate Lindholm. He used to run our Minnesota region before moving to a competitor. We hadn't spoken in years. "Hey," he said kindly. "I thought you were presenting this year. Weren't you in ops now?" I nodded, but couldn't find words. "I told my COO to come just for your session," he said, scratching his beard. "We were excited to hear what you'd done with the Texas rollout. Surprised to see Caleb instead." I managed to smile, and for the first time in my life, I realized something quietly devastating. They didn't just remove me from the stage. They took what I built and gave it to someone else. I returned to the ballroom just before the final afternoon session began. I didn't want to. Every instinct in my body told me to leave, to find some corner booth in a nearby diner and disappear. But something tethered me there. Not hope, not pride, curiosity. I needed to hear what Caleb was going to say. I slipped into the back row just as they dimmed the lights. The screen flickered to life again. Legacy and leadership, a forward vision. Caleb's name stood alone beneath the title. He stood at the podium, awkward in his navy suit, shifting from foot to foot like a boy giving a book report. Then he started to speak. And I froze. "Strategic growth isn't just about market share," he said, slowly, eyes locked on the back wall. "It's about matching footprint to flexibility, about anticipating shifts before they happen, about building infrastructure that thinks in decades, not quarters." My hands clenched in my lap. That wasn't just a cliché. That was my sentence, my cadence, my framework. I'd written those words last October, after the third regional pilot I led exceeded benchmarks. I'd included that exact phrasing in my internal memo to Dad, the one I sent after our Austin test launched 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I kept listening, each word like a thread yanked from a sweater I'd built with my own hands. "Franchise success depends on back-end clarity," Caleb continued. "You can't scale chaos, you have to systemize brilliance, document culture. Architect momentum." Architect momentum. That wasn't a phrase people just said. That was me. That was my language. I felt the air go thin in the back of my throat. He was reciting my work, word for word. The slides matched too. The structure. The 3-tier visual model I'd spent 2 weekends designing, he'd just recolored it, changed the font. But it was mine. Completely. The worst part? People were impressed. Heads were nodding. Notes were being taken. I even heard someone mutter, "Sharp, kid," 2 rows in front of me. And when the speech ended with polite applause, Dad stood to clap first. Hard, proud, visible. I didn't clap. I just sat there and still and small and boiling. It wasn't just about ego or credit. It was about violation. My thoughts, my planning, my long nights over spreadsheets and pitch decks, repurposed without acknowledgement, and passed off as something Caleb had thought of in between frat parties and brand redesign mock-ups. After the session, the hallway buzzed with chatter. I kept to the shadows near the elevator bank, unsure if I was waiting for someone to notice, or just trying to keep my legs from shaking. Heather found me first. She leaned in close like someone offering gossip. "He did well, right?" I stared at her. "You read my memo last fall. You know that was my outline." Heather blinked once. "You're being sensitive." My jaw locked. "He read it like a script. You've always been better at writing. He's better at presenting." A pause. That awful smile. It's still a team win, Sarah. You're part of the family. That word, family. They only used it when they needed me to smile and stay quiet, when they wanted me cooperative but invisible, when they needed to use my work but couldn't bear to share the credit. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I walked past her, through the lounge, past the bar, down the side hallway where the early speaker check-in had been. The volunteer table was empty now, but the banner still hung. Westfield Family Legacy, 1984-2024. I stared at it for a long time, because I'd helped build that timeline, and they'd buried my name in it like a footnote they hoped no one would read. The cocktail hour was supposed to be the casual wind-down, a chance for executives to mingle, for sponsors to glad hand, for family photos to be retaken with wine glasses instead of water. I didn't want to be there, but I stayed. I stood near the indoor ficus plant, beside the double doors to the lounge. Close enough to be seen, far enough not to be invited. The room glowed with polite energy. Conversations floated above the hum of jazz piano from a hired trio in matching black ties. Waitstaff passed through with small skewers of shrimp and trays of cranberry mocktails. I hadn't eaten since lunch. Then I heard it. "Sarah, quick question." A woman in her mid-50s stepped forward. Blonde bob, smart glasses. One of the vendors. I vaguely remembered her from past conferences. She smiled with the ease of someone used to closing deals. "I just wanted to say," she began, "Caleb did a solid job up there. Really sharp presentation. That framework, the operations roll-in piece, especially, very clean." I nodded, tight. "Thanks." She paused. "Did you approve that strategy? Or was it something you two co-developed?" I froze. Her tone was genuine, curious, but the words landed like a slap. Because what she'd just asked, what the room was starting to wonder, wasn't, "Did you help him?" It was, "Did you sign off on this version of yourself being erased?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. Technically, I hadn't. No one had shown me the final version. No one had asked for review or comment. He took it, modified it, called it his, and they let him. I said slowly. "Some of it was from an earlier draft I sent in." She tilted her head. "So you were part of the architecture?" "I was the architect," I said before I could stop myself, her eyebrows lifted, just slightly. "Interesting." That wasn't clear from the session. Exactly. It wasn't meant to be. Before she could ask more, her name was called from across the room. She gave a polite wave and moved toward the bar. But the damage was done. Not to me. No, to the story they'd tried so carefully to frame. Because if she had noticed, others had too. I moved through the crowd like someone half awake, hearing snippets. Didn't she used to run Texas? Her outline, I think. I assumed she'd be on stage. Each line stung. Not because they were false, but because they were too late. Near the cheese station, I spotted Caleb laughing with two interns. His blazer was unbuttoned now, and he held a glass of something dark and celebratory. I stood just long enough to hear him say, "Yeah." The whole framework came together in 2 weeks. Just locked in. I walked away. I didn't trust myself to stand near him without shaking. I ended up on the mezzanine, alone, above the ballroom, looking down over the fake chandeliers and carpeted symmetry. My breath fogged the glass railing. They were building something down there. A new order. One that didn't include me. And if I stayed quiet, I was helping them pour the foundation. That thought made something tighten inside my chest. Because I hadn't flown here to be polite. I hadn't left my job interview, missed my own work deadline, spent money I didn't have, for this. Not to watch my own language used as Caleb's resume. Not to be a ghost in a room I helped build. And definitely not to pretend I didn't notice. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another ignored call from Mum. Another polite message I wouldn't open yet, but it was the banner on the home screen that made me freeze. Tomorrow, closing brunch and final recognition panel, 9:30 a.m. I hadn't seen that on the earlier agenda. And under it, in bold, key voices, Heather, Caleb, Richard Kavanaugh. No, Sarah. Again. I got back to my hotel room at 11:06 p.m. The hallway was silent, the kind that feels padded. I heard the faint hum of vending machines, someone's TV behind a door. I was too tired to cry, too angry to speak, too wired to sleep. That kind of tired lives in your spine. It spreads to your chest. And when you finally get a moment alone, it doesn't release you. It coils tighter, quieter, until you're more not than person. I saw the paper before I even unlocked the door. A single sheet of folded cardstock, slid under the crack, no envelope. Just a name scrawled across the front in pen. Sarah. I picked it up carefully like it might dissolve in my hand. Inside, no greeting, no signature, just 9 words. You should know they planned it without you. That was it. No punctuation, no explanation, no context. No, I stood there, holding the note like it might answer something. But it didn't need to, because I already knew. I sat down on the bed, blazer still on, shoes still laced, and I started to shake. Not the kind of dramatic shaking you see in movies, a quieter one, like my ribs were trying to hold something in that didn't want to stay. They planned it without me. The schedule change, the presentation shift, the framing of Caleb as the future. The erasure of everything I contributed, everything I built, everything I thought still had value. It wasn't spontaneous, it wasn't a misprint or a last-minute emergency, it was a decision, a deliberate, calculated decision. And the moment I accepted that, not suspected it, not feared it, but knew it, I felt something in me collapse. Not break. Collapse. There's a difference. When something breaks, it screams. When it collapses, it goes quiet. I curled forward on the bed, forehead against my knees, and I stayed like that for what could have been minutes or hours. I didn't check. I kept hearing Caleb's voice in my head. You can't scale chaos. You have to systemize brilliance. Brilliance. My brilliance. Words I wrote during back-to-back work weeks, when no one else would touch the Texas rollout. When Heather was on sabbatical and Caleb was still finding himself in graphic design internships. When Dad barely returned my messages. When Mum said I should just be grateful to contribute. And now I was a ghost behind the curtain. A footnote they hoped no one would read. I stood finally and walked to the mirror. My reflection looked pale, flat, like someone who'd spent the day being quietly erased. And then I saw it. Still clipped to the hotel room keychain was the printed name tag from registration. Sarah Cavanaugh. Support team support. Not strategy, not leadership, not speaker. Support. The language of dismissal. Laminated. I unclipped it, held it in my hand. Tight. Then, without thinking, I snapped the plastic badge in half. Hard. Quick. The crack echoed in the empty room. It didn't fix anything, but it was the first sound I'd made all day that felt like mine. I set the 2 halves on the nightstand, and underneath them I placed the note. Not to keep, but as evidence. Because after what I'd seen today, what I'd felt, there was no way I could keep pretending this was something I could fix with a smile or a talk or even another memo. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a message. I woke up with my clothes still on and a weight in my chest that didn't belong to sleep. The room smelled like synthetic linen spray and old hotel air. Outside, the sun was already high. 9:17 a.m. The final brunch was in 13 minutes. I didn't move. I wasn't going. Not to sit through another round of forced applause and legacy speeches where I'd be thanked for assistance and asked to pour coffee while Caleb took the closing bow. Not after what I found last night. Not with that note still burning in the back of my mind. I got up slowly, splashed water on my face, threw the conference lanyard into the trash and shut the blinds so hard they rattled. I hadn't decided what I would do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not sit quietly in that room again. Then came the knock. 2 short, firm taps. Not housekeeping. Not room service. I froze. Another knock. Sarah? A man's voice. Calm. Familiar. It's Nate. I opened the door halfway. Nate Lindholm stood in the hallway holding a manila envelope and 2 coffees. Same trim beard, same dark blazer from the networking event. His expression was unreadable. Can I come in for a second? I hesitated. then stepped aside. He handed me one of the coffees without a word, set the envelope on the edge of the desk like it was evidence in a trial. "I wasn't planning on talking to you," he said, finally. "But after what I overheard this morning, backstage before the brunch, I think you deserve to know." I didn't speak. He opened the envelope. Inside were 2 printed pages, scanned copies of the panel prep notes. Speaker talking points, passed to all presenters. On the second page, beneath a header that read, "Vision for Expansion," I saw a line, "Original Strategy Framework adapted from internal contributor. Name withheld at family's request." I stared at it. "Caleb told them it was yours," Nate said. "Not directly, but enough that one of the interns asked if he needed to get your permission. And your dad said, his exact words, 'She's not relevant to this narrative. Keep her off the record.'" Off the record? I sat down. It shouldn't have surprised me, but hearing it in someone else's voice made it real. Not paranoia, not oversensitivity, truth. "Heather backed him," Nate continued. "Said you were more of a resource than a leader." The room went quiet after that. I looked at the papers again. My work, my voice, filed as an unnamed internal. "So that's it," I said finally. "They built an entire legacy weekend around removing me, and now they're assigning footnotes to keep me in the background." He nodded. "I'm not here to tell you what to do. Just figured you should know before they close the weekend with your work in their mouths." We sat in silence for a moment. The air was thick with something heavier than awkwardness. It was complicity, witness. Then he added, "They expect you to sit this one out. I heard Caleb say it himself. She won't make a scene, she never does." I stood. The coffee in my hand was still warm. My heart wasn't. I walked over to the mirror, looked at myself. Not the version in last night's photo, not the girl half-cropped on the edge, but the woman in full frame. I turned to Nate. "Do they start at 9:30 sharp?" He smiled. "You've got 6 minutes." I didn't need more. The ballroom was already full when I arrived. Rows of white-draped tables, fresh pitchers of orange juice, and stacked plates of warm croissants. Guests in business casual leaned back in their chairs, scanning the glossy conference booklets, sipping coffee, murmuring about flights and follow-ups. On the stage were 3 chairs, a faux wood podium, and the large projection of the event's final slide. Legacy Voices, the path forward. The lights dimmed, and I walked in. Not quietly, not rushed, just deliberately. Enough that heads turned. I didn't look at anyone. Not Mum, who sat 2 rows from the front in a lavender blouse she always wore for photos. Not Heather, who glanced sideways the second she saw me, then back to the stage as if I'd broken some rule by arriving. And not Caleb, already seated up front, clutching a folded page like it was a diploma. I walked past every table. My heels clicked against the floor like a metronome set to defiance. I didn't slow. I didn't shrink. I reached the front row. 1 seat remained open, directly across from the stage. I sat, straight-backed, hands in my lap, shoulders square. And I looked at my father. He had just taken the podium, smile tight, suit impeccable. He was about to speak. I saw his throat shift as he swallowed and glanced down at his notes. Then he looked up and saw me. He blinked, paused. The room noticed the break in rhythm, noticed his eyes shift left, then back. He cleared his throat. "We've had an extraordinary weekend," he began, voice steady but thinner than usual. "And as we close, it's important to acknowledge those who represent the future of this brand." I didn't move. He gestured to Heather, seated off stage. She nodded like a professional stepping into a headshot. He nodded to Caleb, who stood with a slight wave and a grin so proud it almost masked the nerves in his jaw. "We've asked them both to share a few words on where we go from here. Their insight, their passion." His eyes found mine again. "Their ownership of this legacy is something we treasure deeply." Not a flicker. I kept looking at him, not blinking, not smiling, not giving him even one signal that I would accept this performance as truth. The room had gone oddly still. It wasn't tense yet, just off-kilter. Like someone had hit play on a familiar song, but the melody was missing a note. Heather spoke first, polished, safe. Phrases like evolving strategy, honoring foundation, and intergenerational coherence. People nodded, smiled, sipped their juice. Then Caleb. He was looser now, confident. His words came easy. I recognized them. Phrases pulled from the same framework I'd once sent in an after-hours memo. Words he still hadn't credited. Ideas he wore like a second suit. And I watched him say them in front of 200 people. This time, though, I wasn't watching from the hallway. I wasn't hidden behind hotel curtains or stuck outside the lens of the family photo. I was right here, in the frame, in the light, and when he finished and the applause came, scattered, less enthused than yesterday. I didn't clap. I stood, not to speak, not to argue, not to perform, just to remind the room that I existed, and that I wasn't backing out of view again. Dad stepped forward like he might wrap things up. He opened his mouth, then stopped, because the front row hadn't stopped watching me, because more than one person had turned to look, because presence, when claimed with full silence, is louder than any microphone. The brunch ended without a formal close. No group photo, no final toast, no music on the speakers. People clapped politely, then drifted toward the doors like smoke curling from a dying fire. There was no standing ovation, just the awkward murmur of closing conversations that didn't quite know what tone to take. I didn't move from my place in the front row. I let them see me stay seated after everyone else stood. Let them register the fact that I was the only one whose name hadn't been spoken. Dad stepped down from the stage with Heather and Caleb in tow. Their smiles faded the second they looked in my direction. Heather turned to check her phone. Caleb rubbed his neck, pretending to be distracted by a staffer. Then someone else stepped forward. A tall man with silver at his temples, wearing a conference badge marked in navy. Senior partner, Edison Holdings. I recognized him vaguely, one of Dad's longest corporate allies from the East Coast expansion days. He didn't look at me, he looked at Dad. "Richard," he said, firm but calm, "why wasn't your daughter part of the panel?" The question landed like a dropped plate. Dad's smile froze. "Excuse me?" "Sarah," the man said, now nodding toward me. "She led the Texas expansion. I remember reading her initial proposal, and I know she wrote the growth strategy Caleb presented yesterday." The pause in the room wasn't loud, but it was seismic. Dad laughed. "Too quick." "Well, you know how these events go, time constraints, shifting schedules. She wasn't formally listed for this year's lineup." The man's brow creased. "But she's the architect, correct?" Heather stepped in, smoothing her voice. "Sarah's always been a huge part of the support ecosystem." "I didn't ask about support," he said. This time he did look at me. I asked why the strategist whose framework we all came here to hear was seated in the audience, while her younger cousin took credit. Every head within earshot turned. I stood, not out of defiance, just because it was time. My voice didn't shake. "I wasn't given an answer," I said steady. "Same as you." The man nodded once. His eyes didn't carry sympathy. They carried calculation, business, reputation, legacy. "I'll be re-evaluating our partnership," he said quietly, "if that's how you frame leadership." He walked off without waiting for a reply. Caleb's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Heather took a half step forward, then back. And Dad? Dad turned toward me like he finally saw me in full colour, not as a detail, not as an afterthought, but as the breach in the system he'd thought was bulletproof. He didn't say a word. Not then. I stepped out of the row, picked up the event booklet from my chair, the one with Caleb's face on page 4, smiling like he'd built the kingdom. And then I left. Not in a rush, not with a scene, just with presence. The silence behind me wasn't empty. It was shifting. I was halfway through folding my blazer when my phone buzzed. It wasn't Dad, not Heather, not Caleb. It was a message from Marsha Reddick, senior board chair. one of the oldest names tied to the family's external board. She'd been part of the original founding trust, someone who'd always stayed in the background, but whose decisions shaped more than any of us ever saw. "Can we talk? Alone. 20 Mins East Patio." I paused, then grabbed my coat. The east patio was mostly empty, just a few servers clearing last brunch plates and a fountain trickling beside potted palms. Marcia sat at a small round table in tailored navy slacks, one silver earring catching the light. She didn't smile when I approached. "You came," she said. "You asked." She gestured to the chair across from her. I sat, then she dropped it. No hesitation, no small talk. "They pulled your panel 3 weeks ago," she said. "Not for timing, not for duplication, because your father told the board you'd become difficult to align with publicly." My mouth went dry. "He framed it," she continued, "as if you were unstable, that you'd rejected internal direction, that you refused to collaborate." "That's not true," I said, voice tight. "I know," she answered. I blinked. "I've seen your original memos," she added, reaching into her portfolio. "I reviewed your Texas rollout documentation myself. That expansion brought in 18.6% profit growth in under 14 months. No one, not Heather, not Caleb, has ever touched that kind of metric." My heart pounded. "I believed you were the succession plan," she said flatly. "Until 2 weeks ago, I expected your name on every slide." "Then what happened?" She looked out toward the empty lawn. "Your mother called a vote quietly, off calendar, said the brand needed a more presentable figurehead, younger, male, family-oriented. Caleb." She nodded once. "Your father didn't fight it." I gripped the edge of the chair. "So that's it?" I said. "I was invisible by committee?" "No," she said. "You were silenced." Silenced. The word didn't echo. It landed. "You should have told me," I said. "Someone should have—" "Would you have believed it without seeing it unfold?" she asked gently. The answer was no, but the silence in my chest didn't feel like peace. It felt like ignition. "I can't fix what the family broke," Marcia said, "but I can offer you a choice." I looked up. "I'm calling an emergency audit," she said. "You won't be named, not yet, but the board has the right to demand clarity on any strategic material reused without attribution, especially if it affected external partnerships." "You're opening a formal review," she nodded. "And if I back it?" Her eyes narrowed. "Then we move forward. Not with a whisper, with documentation." For the first time in 3 days, I felt the air shift around me. I wasn't just a ghost anymore. I was evidence, and once evidence breathes, it starts building its own momentum. I didn't knock. I used the spare keycard I knew she always left at the front desk under a different name. "For emergencies," she used to say when I was little, like I'd ever need it. I walked into her room and locked the door behind me. Mum sat on the edge of the bed, flipping through a travel jewelry case. Not startled, not surprised, just paused, like she knew this moment would come. I stayed standing. "We need to talk," I said. She didn't look up. "I figured you'd cool off by morning." "I spoke with Marcia. That got her." She stilled. "She told me about the vote, the pooled agenda, the presentable figurehead." I took one step closer. "You're the one who initiated it." She closed the case gently, then looked at me like she'd just spotted a stubborn stain on a nice blouse. "Sarah, it wasn't personal. Don't insult me." A beat of silence. "Then let's be honest," she said. "You don't fit the face of this legacy. You're intense. You work too much. You don't soften in public. You don't perform affection." "I build growth," I said. "I save departments. I create systems." She sighed, like I was missing the point. "Image matters," she said. "Caleb smiles. People relax. He says half of what you do and they applaud twice as loud." "He steals what I do," she shrugged. "Welcome to the real world." My hands tightened at my sides. "I wasn't difficult," I said. "I was direct. I wasn't unpresentable. I was inconvenient to your fantasy." Now she stood. "You think leadership is earned," she said quietly. But in this family, it's orchestrated. Presentation is policy. Legacy is optics. No, I said. Legacy is impact. And then I pulled the folder from my bag, the one Marcia had given me. I set it on the desk, slow and deliberate. She didn't touch it. You already lost control of the narrative, I said. The board is watching. Edison Holdings is pulling back. People are asking questions you can't shape with a brunch panel. Her jaw tensed. You're going to tank your own valuation trying to erase the one person keeping the system intact. For the first time I saw it, crack through her eyes. Not regret. Fear. What do you want? She asked, clipped. I took a breath. I want a retraction. A board statement clarifying authorship of all frameworks delivered this weekend. I want my name back on everything I built. I want the internal email that pulled my name from the keynote, revoked, acknowledged, and replaced. And if I say no? I won't raise my voice, I said. I'll raise questions. I'll raise visibility. I'll raise every partner you've kept blind to how decisions were made. She didn't speak. I stepped to the door. Mum, I said, pausing before I left. You didn't remove me because I failed. You removed me because I proved I didn't need you to win. She didn't stop me. She didn't call out. She just sat back down, slower this time, the jewelry case forgotten, and the silence finally honest. The elevator down from Mum's room felt colder than before. I stood in silence, blazer buttoned tight, folder in hand. The same folder that had travelled with me through every city where I'd made the company expand. Quietly, invisibly, effectively. Now, it was firewood. I stepped into the mezzanine just as my phone buzzed. Marcia again. One line. They're voting now, they moved it up. Second floor. Room B. No invitation. No preamble. Just coordinates. I turned sharply and crossed the main lobby, heels cutting over marble tile like punctuation. The hallway toward Room B was roped off, but I didn't slow. One of the aides looked up to stop me, then saw my face. He stepped aside. Room B wasn't flashy. No stage, no lights, just a U-shaped table, 12 chairs and names printed on small tent cards in block serif font. Every person in that room had been part of my father's inner circle, and every single one of them turned when I walked in. I didn't speak, not yet. I walked to the far corner, set down the folder on the open chair beside Marcia, then stood behind it. Dad was mid-sentence. He faltered. This is a closed... Let her stand, Marcia interrupted. No one objected. No one dared. Heather sat near the edge, arms folded. Caleb looked nauseous, mouth tight. Dad swallowed. We've convened this early vote to confirm Caleb's position as interim brand successor. Marcia raised her hand. Before we proceed, she said calmly, we need to review documented authorship of strategic assets used during this conference. She turned to me. Sarah? I opened the folder, held up the copy of the framework Caleb had presented, then held up my original, time-stamped, annotated, and identical in structure. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't dramatize it, I just said, this was taken without attribution, delivered under false authorship, and approved by senior staff who knew otherwise. Gasps were unnecessary. Everyone in that room already knew. They just hadn't expected the ghost to show up with proof. I'm not challenging Caleb as a person, I continued. I'm challenging the system that repackaged my labor under his name and called it unifying. I turned slightly, just enough to face Heather. Your email pulled me from the agenda 3 weeks ago. You used words like optics and stability, but this brand didn't grow on optics. It grew on results. Mine, then to Dad. You once told me I didn't understand legacy, that it was more than numbers. You're right, it is. It's how we treat the ones who built the foundation when the cameras aren't rolling. I laid the folder down. The only reason I'm here is because someone decided silence wasn't loyalty, it was convenience. The room stayed still, then Marcia spoke. I motioned to pause the vote. A second voice chimed in, then a third. Dad leaned forward, face white. Sarah, this isn't how we do things. No, I said. It's how you do things. I stepped back. I'm done making rooms feel comfortable by disappearing. Marcia gave me a small nod. Not praise. Recognition. For the first time in my career, I didn't feel like an addition. I felt like weight, and rooms shift under real weight. The vote was suspended. The board broke into private discussions. Caleb disappeared from the hallway like smoke. Dad stayed behind, quietly working the room, trying to soften corners that no longer bent. I walked out through the lobby. Half the guests were gone. Luggage wheeled past. Laughter echoed near the exit. Someone recounting a brunch moment like it meant something. But for me, the weekend had calcified into something else. Legacy didn't feel like gold anymore. It felt like concrete poured over bones. Then I felt a hand on my arm. Tight. Sudden. Too familiar. Heather. She pulled me aside just past the concierge desk where no one could hear. Her eyes weren't angry. They were surgical. You think you've won something, she hissed. I said nothing. You think Marcia's going to crown you because you waved some dusty folder around? You mean the one with my name on the work your brother plagiarized? Her jaw clenched. You're not leadership material, Sarah, she said. You never were. You don't adapt. You don't charm. You don't know when to let other people shine. I laughed. Just once. Cold. I know when people try to steal the light entirely. She leaned in. You want to know why they backed Caleb? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because he's manageable. Because he smiles on cue. Because he knows how to keep donors from asking questions. And I ask too many, I said. No, you make people answer. I didn't blink. You had your shot, she said. Texas bought you time, not trust. You should have stayed quiet, played long game. We could have given you a slice eventually. A slice, I repeated. Instead, she spat, you chose theatre. You turned a family event into a courtroom. And now you've made yourself radioactive. I stepped back, took in the polished suit, the pearl earrings, the eyes of someone who'd always known the game better, but never expected me to start rewriting the rules. I don't want your slice, I said. I want the whole table rebuilt. You'll never get their blessing, she snapped. I don't need their blessing, I said. I need their silence broken, she faltered, and I saw it just for a second. The fear that her version of control had slipped. That someone once positioned as the support beam had become the bulldozer. I didn't wait for her to recover. I walked away, arm burning where she'd grabbed it, head clear. Because this wasn't about inheritance anymore. It wasn't about a keynote or a conference or even a name on a slide. It was about finally burning down the version of myself they had edited for years and watching them squint in the light of the full picture. No cropping, no apology, no retreat. The board reconvened at 4:30 p.m. No invitation this time. But no one stopped me either. Room B felt smaller now. Not physically, mentally. The tension was no longer quiet. It hummed sharp and live in the corners of every gaze that tried to look casual. Dad sat in his usual spot, pen in hand, but his fingers didn't move. Heather stood, arms crossed, the mask finally slipping. Caleb? Absent. I didn't ask where he was. I didn't need to. He wasn't the decision-maker anymore. I took the chair beside Marcia without a word. She nodded. Before we resume the vote, she said, voice measured, Sarah has requested the floor. No gasps this time. Only eyes. I stood. No papers. No theatrics. Just the clarity of someone who had been edited out for years and had now memorized every flaw in the script. I'm not here to reclaim a title, I said. I'm here to restructure the stage. A few brows lifted. Legacy, I continued, doesn't belong to whoever smiles best at brunch. It belongs to whoever holds the system upright when it starts to rot. And right now, this system is rot. Dad shifted, opened his mouth. I held up a hand. I've prepared a proposal, I said, turning to Marcia. One that eliminates centralized title succession entirely. In its place, a strategic leadership council with rotating quarterly leads, merit-based advancement, and public documentation of contributions per project. Gasps this time. Small, contained, but undeniable. Heather's voice cut in, sharp. You can't dismantle decades of hierarchy because you didn't get a mic. I did get a mic, I said calmly. I built it. Then they repackaged it with Caleb's voice. This isn't revenge. It's repair. Someone at the far end, the CFO's assistant, I think, cleared their throat. That kind of restructuring would require full board override. It already has 3 sponsor signatures, I said, and 2 ethics flags from external partners after yesterday's presentation. I turned back to the room. Make no mistake, I said. You're not deciding if I get a seat. You're deciding whether this structure survives the year intact under legal scrutiny. Silence. Then Marcia again. Motion on the floor, she said. All in favour of suspending the current vote and reviewing the proposed restructure as priority agenda? Hands rose. 1, 2, 5, 8. Heather didn't raise hers. Dad didn't either, but they didn't vote no. They stayed still, and in a room where silence used to be my cage, that stillness was now mine to command. Marcia looked at me. You'll present the restructure formally Monday, she said, with documented author credits restored. I nodded, and that was it. No cheers, no clapping, just shift, just architecture moving beneath its own weight. When the room emptied, I stayed seated, not from exhaustion, from arrival, because for the first time since I was 23, I wasn't trying to get in. I was already here. I stepped out of room B as the sun fell through the lobby's tall windows in long amber stripes. The weekend crowd was gone. No more branded lanyards, no more staged smiles. The last staffers were rolling equipment carts across the floor. A distant vacuum hummed near the back hallway, and there, by the far wall, stood my father, alone. Not flanked by Heather or cushioned by Caleb's absence. Just him. Tie loosened, shoulders not slumped but smaller. He didn't speak when I approached, didn't move, and neither did I. We stood there, 2 feet apart like survivors of the same storm who'd finally washed up on opposite ends of a different shore. He was the first to break the silence. You came prepared, he said. I nodded. I had to. He exhaled, just barely. You were never meant to be invisible, he said. I didn't flinch. But you let them make me disappear, I said. He looked down. And I saw it. Not guilt, not shame. Just recognition. The kind that arrives too late to change the past, but early enough to wound. I could have said more. I could have asked why he never corrected Heather, why he didn't speak up during Caleb's panel, why he let my name get pulled like it was a misprint on a menu. But I already knew the answer. He didn't want to fight the structure he built, and now it was no longer his to control. I'm not angry anymore, I said quietly. He looked up. I'm not interested in being your daughter on paper, I added. Not if it means being erased in practice. He swallowed hard. I never thought... I know, I cut in. That's the problem. You never thought I'd stand. I stepped past him. No hug, no dramatic pause, just presence. And the silence he left me in finally returned to him. Outside, the hotel's loading dock glowed in late sunlight. I pulled my coat tighter, the wind curling through like breath before words. I didn't call a car. I walked. Through the long path behind the hotel, past where they held the welcome dinner on Friday. The candles were gone. The banners were packed. The space was just a patio now, chairs stacked, wind sweeping leaves across stone. And I stood there for a moment, right where Caleb had made his first speech, right where I'd stood on the sidelines, clapping for an echo of my own work. I looked at the empty platform. No lights, no applause, just shadow. And I smiled, because legacy isn't in the stage. It's in who stays when the lights go out, and I'm still standing.